Sarah Williams pulled her apron tighter as she wiped her brow, standing beside her makeshift stand by the roadside. At 53, she was a woman marked by a lifetime of hard work. Years spent toiling on Greenfield Farm had given her hands that were calloused and rough, but her heart was still kind and generous. It had been years since the farm had stopped paying regular wages, and she, along with other struggling workers, had been left to sell small goods by the road to make ends meet. Looking around, Sarah noticed she'd arrived later than usual today. The best spots were already taken by her neighbors, and she sighed as she arranged her milk bottles, hoping she'd get enough sales to help with the badly needed repairs on her old leaky roof. Her helpful neighbor Jack had offered to patch it, but the supplies weren't cheap, and every penny mattered. She whispered a prayer under her breath. "Lord, let me sell it all today." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah watched cars and buses pass by, stopping only at the closer stalls. Her heart sank as an hour slipped by with barely any customers. She managed to flag down a few cars, gratefully smiling as drivers bought her dairy products. Half gone, half to go, she thought. She counted her money, realizing she still needed more to cover the supplies. With a determined smile, she decided to stay a bit longer, praying the afternoon would bring better luck. It was midday when Sarah noticed a bus pull over. A young boy, barely 12, jumped off and started talking earnestly with the driver, his hands gesturing as he spoke. The driver, however, only shook his head, and after a moment the bus pulled away, leaving the boy on the curb, his head in his hands. Sarah's heart went out to him as she recognized him as Danny, a young boy from a neighboring village. She had seen him around before, always cheerful and full of energy. Sarah felt a tug in her heart. She picked up a bottle of milk and a packet of cheese pancakes from her stand and walked over to him. "Here, sweetie," she said softly. "You look hungry." The boy looked up, startled. For a moment he hesitated, suspicion flickering in his tired eyes. But the sight of the food was too tempting, and he reached out, murmuring, "Thank you, ma'am. What's your name, son? And what are you doing here all by yourself?" she asked gently, lowering herself to sit beside him on the curb. Between bites, the boy shared his story. His name was Danny Greer, and he was trying to get to his father's house in the city. His parents had split up the previous year, and he'd been living with his mother's relatives in the nearby village. But things had become difficult. The relatives argued often, sometimes losing their tempers, leaving Danny frightened and unwelcome. "Last night I hid in the shed all night, scared to go inside. I thought if I could get to my daddy's, things would be okay," he explained. "I tried to get on the bus, asked the drivers real nice, but they wouldn't let me ride without any money. I know the way, though. I just need to get to the station at the end of the line." Sarah's heart ached for him. She reached into her pocket, feeling the small amount she'd made from her sales that day. She barely had enough to cover her own needs, but the thought of this child trying to find his way along the road alone was too much for her. She pulled out a crisp $20 bill, just enough for a ticket to his father's stop, and pressed it into his hand. "Here, honey, take this and get yourself to your daddy. Make sure you stay safe," she said softly. Danny's eyes grew wide with surprise and gratitude. Without another word, he wrapped his arms around her in a quick hug, and as the final bus of the day arrived, he ran toward it, waving to her as he climbed on board. "Thank you, Miss Sarah. I'll never forget you," he shouted as the bus pulled away. She waved back, her heart full of hope for him, feeling a sense of peace. Years passed, and life continued to be hard on Sarah. She remained at Greenfield Farm, giving her best efforts day after day. But despite her loyalty and dedication, the new manager, Michael Torrance, showed little care for the farm's workers. When Sarah finally gathered the courage to ask for help with the repairs on her home, Michael responded dismissively, brushing her off with a cold smirk. "Look, Sarah," he said with a shrug, "we've got to focus on profits. We don't have room for handouts. If you want something, you need to have something to trade. Times have changed." Furious and humiliated, Sarah left his office with her head held high, but her heart felt heavy. Her friend and former co-worker Margaret noticed her distress and rushed to comfort her. Sarah poured out her story of frustration and hurt, and Margaret wrapped her in a hug, promising they'd figure out a way to get her through this. One evening as Sarah returned home, she was surprised to see a sleek black car parked in her driveway. Two men stood. Beside it, one older and distinguished looking, and the other a young man in jeans and a button-down shirt. The young man turned and looked at Sarah, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Miss Sarah," he called out, his eyes lighting up. "It's me, Danny Greer from the bus stop. Do you remember?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the boy she'd helped years ago, now all grown up. With tears of joy, she hugged him, overwhelmed by the memories. Danny introduced her to his father, Samuel, who had come to visit with him. Samuel shook her hand warmly, expressing his gratitude for her kindness all those years ago. "Danny never forgot you, Miss Sarah," Samuel said, smiling. He always talked about the kind woman who helped him when he was alone. As they chatted over tea, Danny noticed the disrepair of Sarah's home. He shared a look with his father, and soon after, they arranged for a contractor to start work on her house. Sarah protested, insisting she couldn't afford such repairs, but Danny reassured her, saying, "We want to do this for you. It's a small way to repay your kindness." The next morning, Sarah's yard was buzzing with workers. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as they repaired her roof and fixed up her home. Just then, Michael Torrance appeared, furious. "Sarah, what's all this? You can't afford this work, but you're hiring contractors?" Before Sarah could respond, Samuel stepped forward, introducing himself. "Mr. Torrance, I think we should discuss the treatment of dedicated employees. It's only fair to support those who have given years of loyal service to the farm." Michael looked uncomfortable as Samuel led him aside for a private talk. Sarah caught snippets of the conversation. Words like labor board and worker rights floated her way. By the end of their talk, Michael's attitude had changed, and he agreed to make amends for his poor treatment of Sarah. With her home repaired and a sense of justice restored, Sarah invited Danny and Samuel to visit often. Danny, now a young man with a successful career, looked at her with gratitude and respect. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never forgot what you did for me. I'd be honored if we could visit you often, make this a second home. You're like family to me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she hugged him tightly, feeling a warmth and joy she hadn't felt in years. "Of course, Danny," she whispered. "You're always welcome here." It's funny, isn't it? A little kindness, and look where it's brought us. Danny nodded, his own eyes misting with emotion. "It just goes to show," he said softly. "A simple act of kindness can change lives forever." As Sarah looked around her newly restored home, surrounded by people who cared for her, she knew that her life had come full circle. Her small act of kindness had come back to her in ways she could never have imagined, and for the first time in years, she felt hope, love, and a deep sense of belonging.